Atheists often claim the high ground of pure logic, leaving Christians to defend their faith with personal feelings and emotional appeals. When belief relies solely on subjective experience, it creates a massive vulnerability in any debate. Jim, the founder of the Way Fellowship, also known as Mr. Batman, used to exploit that exact vulnerability. As an educator, he taught evolutionary science at the high school level and actively dismantled Christian worldviews. When believers brought him tradition or emotion, the arguments bounced right off. He operated from a strictly materialistic framework built entirely on scientific observation, and feelings simply do not compute against physical evidence. If you try to counter a rigid materialistic argument with a subjective experience, you lose. A worldview lacking a strict logical backbone falls apart under pressure. Jim's strictly material worldview hit a wall when he sat down with his uncle in eastern Kentucky. Jim was a highly educated science teacher. His uncle was a newly converted Christian with a 6th grade education. After brushing off a few soft questions, his uncle asked a tough one. He wanted to know exactly where the laws of science came from. Jim cited cosmological constants, and his uncle immediately asked what makes those constants stay constant. That is a massive problem for the materialist. In physics, the second law of thermodynamics, or entropy, dictates that isolated physical systems degrade over time into chaos. If governed entirely by physical decay, a mathematical law cannot sustain itself from inside that system. Everything rots. A strictly material universe is a closed system, where everything physical eventually breaks down. However, the mathematical constants of physics, like the speed of light or the force of gravity, stay perfectly stable. Because a decaying physical system cannot generate its own eternal stability, the source of those constants must reside outside the system itself. Jim now approaches theology with what he calls a dark night of logic mindset. He uses the formal laws of logic, like identity and non-contradiction, as tactical tools to dissect flawed belief systems. Let's test this on hyper-Calvinism. This is the theological doctrine of absolute predestination, which asserts that every single human action is entirely pre-programmed by God, leaving humans with no actual agency. To test this doctrine, Jim uses a simple analogy. Imagine a man commits a crime in a courtyard. He pulled the trigger, so he is clearly guilty. Now imagine that a person builds a mechanical automaton that goes out and commits that exact same crime. In the second scenario, the machine holds zero guilt. The creator of the machine carries the entirety of the liability because the robot had absolutely no choice in the matter. It only executed its programming. If we apply that to the doctrine of absolute predestination, it creates a severe theological error. If God pre-programs human beings to commit sins, and they have no ability to deviate from that programming, then God is the direct author of that sin. The Bible explicitly states that God's nature is perfectly righteous, meaning he cannot be the author of sin. To avoid a fatal logical contradiction, human beings must possess actual free will. This kind of logical testing applies to the scriptural text itself. Over thousands of years, modern language suffers from cultural drift, causing the original definitions of words to warp and change. Jim bypasses modern interpretations by tracing the text back to Paleo-Hebrew. This ancient writing functions as a series of pictographs where every letter is a visual constant with a fixed, unshifting definition. We can see this in the divine name of God, Yahweh. It is composed of 4 specific letters in Hebrew: Yod, He, Vav, and He. Let's read the pictographs. The first letter, Yod, is a picture of a hand. The second letter, He, represents a figure with hands raised to heaven and translates to behold. The third letter is Vav, which is a picture of a nail or a tent peg, and the repeating He at the end once again translates to behold. Since Hebrew is read from right to left, combining these symbols gives us a single cohesive phrase: behold the hand, behold the nail. The central message of the New Testament, the crucifixion of Yeshua, is mechanically encoded directly into the spelling of God's name from thousands of years earlier. The text demonstrates an intricate mathematical design immune to translation errors. When you stress test reality using the laws of logic, Purely material worldviews collapse under the weight of entropy, and contradictory religious doctrines fall apart on their own premises. This image shows a traditional Torah scroll, written in exact, measured columns of Hebrew text. For Jim, these writings are not a collection of outdated suggestions. They form the eternal, mathematically precise constitution that governs the kingdom of God. Even biblical miracles are not irrational suspensions of reality. They operate as deliberate visual aids designed to point directly to Yeshua as the ultimate, unchanging constant in the universe. Instead of relying on shifting cultural traditions, believers are called to treat the laws of logic as a tactical manual. It's a precise framework required for spiritual warfare and protecting a household. To mount a true defense of faith, you have to discard relative truth entirely. You start with the unyielding bedrock of the biblical text, and you defend it using uncompromising logic.